Some nights, the silence isn't empty, it's waiting. Daniel, a cautious 16-year-old, never imagined a simple sleepover would turn into a nightmare he'd never forget. His best friend Walter, 17 and usually the braver of the two, had invited him over to his family's house on Grand Street one chilly evening in late October 2024. Both boys expected a night of video games and laughter, but what unfolded was something far darker. With Walter's parents both working late, his mother at the city hospital, and his father at a nearby gym, the house was quiet, except for the two friends. They settled upstairs in Walter's room, controllers in hand, immersed in their favorite game. But amid the flashing screens and competitive banter, an unsettling noise began to creep in. At first, it was faint scratching and soft thuds. They shrugged it off, assuming it was Rusty, Walter's loyal dog, moving around downstairs. But as the minutes ticked by, the noises grew louder, more deliberate. Unease settled in their chests. Curious and a bit nervous, they went to check on Rusty, only to find him peacefully asleep outside Walter's parents' bedroom. That's when the fear hit. If it wasn't Rusty, then what was making those noises? Grabbing kitchen knives and flashlights, Daniel and Walter began a careful search. Upstairs was empty. Downstairs showed no signs of intrusion. Still, the noises persisted, echoing through the silent house. "We should check the backyard," Daniel suggested, voice low. The backyard was fenced in, with a steep drop just beyond the wooden barrier place no one could easily access. But desperation pushed them forward. Splitting up, Walter took the left side while Daniel moved right, near the neighbor's property. Daniel found Walter frozen in place, his flashlight being fixed on the edge of the woods beyond the fence. Following the light, Daniel's heart nearly stopped. There, standing motionless and dressed entirely in black, was a figure watching them. "Run!" Daniel yelled, and they sprinted back inside, locking the doors behind them. They called the police. Officers arrived swiftly but found no evidence of anyone lurking nearby. The boys were told to stay inside and call again if anything else happened. An hour later, as they sat nervously on the couch, Walter suddenly asked, "Did you see that?" Daniel looked toward the window just in time to catch a beam of light slicing through the darkness outside. Another call to 911 followed, and again the police found nothing. When Walter's father finally came home, they took him outside. Footsteps echoed near the woods, but his father dismissed it as a hunter passing through. Relieved, but still shaken, they went to bed. But the nightmare wasn't over. 2 weeks later, Daniel returned for another sleepover. Both parents were working late again. As Rusty wandered outside, Daniel glanced out the back door and froze. A shadowy figure was peering over the fence. They called Rusty inside and locked the doors tight. Minutes later, while upstairs, Daniel saw the figure again through the window. Knives and flashlights in hand, they confronted the backyard, only to find the silhouette of a head outlined against the night sky. They ran inside and called the police once more. The officers stayed for a while but found nothing. This time, Daniel and Walter didn't tell anyone. Who would believe them? Then, around 2 a.m., the pounding started. Not the faint noises from before, but loud, violent banging moving from the side of the house to the front door. Hearts racing, they grabbed Rusty and barricaded themselves in Walter's parents' bedroom, pulling out his father's gun for protection. They called 911 again. Police arrived quickly but found no sign of forced entry or anyone outside. After a thorough search, they left. That was the last time. Though the shadow beyond the fence vanished, the memory remains. Daniel and Walter still feel eyes watching whenever they pass a fence or peer into the dark woods. Some fears don't fade, they linger, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what's outside, but what's waiting just beyond your sight. What started as an ordinary sleepover became the night that changed everything. The night I learned that sometimes the things we fear in the dark aren't just figments of our imagination. I was 16 when it happened, hanging out with my best friend Ramon at his house on Elmwood Drive. Ramon had just turned 17 the week before, and his parents had gone to visit his grandmother in Portland for the weekend, leaving us with strict instructions to behave ourselves. Naturally, we interpreted this as permission to blast the volume on his Xbox and gorge ourselves on pizza and energy drinks until dawn. The autumn rain pelted against the windows of the two-story colonial as we settled into our usual routine battlefield matches that stretched late into the October night. By 11:30 p.m., we'd been gaming for hours when I decided to call my mom and ask if I could stay over. Ramon had already convinced me with promises of an all-night gaming marathon and leftover Chinese takeout. "I'll be right back," I told Ramon as he paused the game. "Gonna call my mom from the kitchen so she can actually hear me." The kitchen felt eerily quiet after the chaos of our gaming session. I made the call quickly, my mom agreeing with minimal fuss, and headed back upstairs to rejoin Ramon. But when I reached the living room, I found him standing frozen in the middle of the room, his controller dangling from his hand. "Dude, what's wrong?" I asked, but Ramon just stared at me with this strange expression, part confusion, part fear. "I thought you were upstairs," he said slowly. "Upstairs?" he said slowly. "I swear I heard someone moving around in the guest room next to the bathroom." But chill ran down my spine. "I was downstairs the whole time, man. Just making the call." Ramon's eyes drifted toward the staircase. "But I definitely heard footsteps, like someone was walking around up there." We stood there for a moment, the only sound the distant hum of the refrigerator. Then Ramon moved toward the stairs, and I followed, neither of us speaking. Each step creaked under our weight as we climbed to the second floor. The hallway felt different now, longer, darker, filled with shadows that seemed to shift in our peripheral vision. Ramon stopped at the guest room door and pressed his ear against the wood. After what felt like an eternity, he slowly turned the handle and pushed the door open just a crack. The room was bathed in dim light from the street lamp outside, enough to see the bed, dresser, and closet. Everything looked normal. Empty. "See? Nothing there," I whispered, trying to convince myself as much as him. Ramon closed the door, but his face remained troubled. "Maybe I'm just paranoid," he muttered as we headed back downstairs. We tried to return to our game, cranking the volume back up and losing ourselves in another match. But something had shifted. The house felt different now, like we were being watched. When the match ended and the loading screen appeared, bringing with it that familiar moment of silence, we both heard it. A low grunt from upstairs. Definitely human. Definitely from the guest room. Ramon and I locked eyes, and he immediately hit the mute button. We sat there, barely breathing, straining to listen. The silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive. "Someone's up there," Ramon whispered, his voice barely audible. They stopped when the TV went quiet. They know we can hear them. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure whoever was upstairs could hear it. Ramon grabbed my arm. "We need to get out. Now. Back to Reed's quieter." We moved like ghosts through his house, avoiding the creaky floorboards we'd memorized from years of sneaking snacks during sleepovers. The back door seemed miles away. When we finally reached it, Ramon slowly turned the deadbolt, and we slipped outside into the cold October air. Ramon immediately pulled out his phone to call 911 while I stood there, shaking not from the cold, but from pure adrenaline. For some inexplicable reason, I found myself looking up at the guest room window. Without thinking, I turned on my phone's flashlight and aimed it at the glass. 3 seconds. That's all it took for my world to tilt sideways. A figure stepped into view behind the window, tall, imposing, clearly an adult man. For a brief moment, our eyes seemed to meet across the darkness. Then he ducked down, disappearing from sight. "Ramon," I hissed, grabbing his arm as he spoke to the 911 dispatcher. "I saw him. He's really up there." Ramon saw the terror in my face and quickly finished giving our address to the police. Then we sprinted down Elmwood Drive like our lives depended on it, not stopping until we reached the corner where Miller Street intersected. We waited there, hearts racing, until we saw the police cruiser pull up to Ramon's house, its red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in ominous colors. Only then did we walk back, staying close to the officers as they entered the house. But as we stood by the patrol car, waiting for the all clear, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A tall figure emerged from the backyard, moving quickly but deliberately, trying to stay in the shadows. He was Massavisli, 6'7" and appeared to be in his early 50s. Even in the dim light, there was something predatory about the way he moved. "That's him," I shouted, grabbing Ramon's arm. "Officers, he's right there." We both screamed for the police, running toward the house. But by the time the officers came outside, the man had vanished into the maze of suburban streets and back alleys. Inside the guest room, the police found evidence of the intruder's presence. A large duffel bag pulled out from under the bed, several items of clothing missing from the dresser, cash stolen from the desk drawer, and the computer still warm from recent use. The window screen had been carefully removed from the outside and placed against the wall. We never saw the man again, but sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I still find myself checking windows and listening for footsteps in empty rooms. Some experiences leave marks that never fully fade, reminders that the line between safety and danger can be as thin as a window pane. That night on Elmwood Drive taught me that the monsters we fear aren't always imaginary. Sometimes they're real, and sometimes they're closer than we ever want to believe. The summer heat of 2019 pressed down like a heavy blanket as 15-year-old Simon tossed restlessly in his bed, unable to shake the feeling that something momentous was about to happen. Little did he know, this ordinary night at his best friend Derek's house would become the most terrifying experience of his young life. The evening had started innocently enough. Simon was spending the night at Derek's place when Derek's parents returned from their weekend getaway a day earlier than expected. The house erupted into controlled chaos as luggage was unpacked and stories were shared, but the boys found themselves feeling oddly displaced in the sudden flurry of adult activity. "Hey, what if we camp out back tonight?" Derek suggested, his eyes lighting up with mischief. "It's perfect weather for it, and we'll have our own space." The idea sparked immediate excitement. They rushed to gather supplies, and within 20 minutes, they had erected a modest tent in the far corner of Derek's backyard. The property's security light cast long shadows across the grass, creating an almost theatrical backdrop for their impromptu adventure. Beyond the weathered wooden fence that marked the boundary of Derek's yard stretched nearly 2 acres of dense woodland. Living in rural Vermont meant that civilization felt both comfortingly close and unnervingly distant, especially as darkness began to settle around them like a thick curtain. After an hour of typical teenage antics, telling jokes, sharing snacks, and debating whether they were brave enough to attempt a midnight horror movie marathon, Derek finally switched off the security light. The darkness that enveloped them was absolute, broken only by the occasional flicker of fireflies and the soft silver of starlight filtering through the canopy above. While Derek seemed to fall asleep almost instantly, Simon found himself trapped in that familiar prison of insomnia. No matter how he positioned himself in the sleeping bag, comfort remained elusive. His body felt foreign against the unfamiliar textures, and his mind refused to quiet. 3 hours passed in a haze of restless shifting and growing frustration. The night sounds of rural Vermont created a symphony around him, the gentle whisper of wind through leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush. These sounds should have been soothing, but instead they seemed to amplify his awareness of how isolated they were. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the natural nocturnal chorus. A rhythmic creaking, like old wood being stressed beyond its limits. The noise seemed to emanate from the direction of the fence, and with each repetition, Simon felt his heart rate climb another notch. At first, he tried to rationalize it away. The wind was picking up. Surely it was just the fence settling, maybe a loose board responding to the air currents. But as minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the sound persisted with an almost mechanical regularity that made his skin crawl. The urge to wake Derek battled with his embarrassment at being frightened by what was probably nothing. The need to use the bathroom finally forced his hand there. Was no way he was venturing outside alone while that ominous creaking continued. "Derek," he whispered, gently shaking his friend's shoulder. "Derek, wake up." Derek stirred groggily. "What's wrong?" "Listen," Simon hissed. "Do you hear that sound?" They lay in silence for a moment. The creaking continued, steady and unnatural. "It's just the wind hitting the fence," Derek mumbled, though Simon detected a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Old wood does that." Despite Derek's dismissive explanation, Simon noticed his friend made no move to go back to sleep. The presence of another conscious person provided just enough courage for Simon to address his biological needs. "I need to go to the bathroom," he whispered. "Just stay awake until I get back, okay?" Simon carefully unzipped the tent flap, the sound seeming thunderous in the quiet night. Instinctively, his gaze was drawn toward the source of the mysterious noise. The darkness was impenetrable, revealing nothing but shifting shadows that could have been anything or nothing at all. His hand found the security light switch almost by memory. He hesitated for a moment, knowing that once he flipped it, there would be no going back to comfortable ignorance. Whatever was causing that sound would be revealed. The light blazed to life, instantly transforming the backyard into a harsh tableau of stark whites and deep blacks. What Simon saw made his blood turn to ice. A figure stood pressed against the fence, head bowed forward, hands gripping the wooden slats. The person's posture suggested they were deliberately pushing against the barrier, testing its strength, or perhaps trying to see through the gaps between the boards. The figure was motionless now, as if caught in the act and waiting to see what would happen next. Simon's finger found the light switch again, plunging them back into darkness so quickly that spots danced before his eyes. He dove into the tent with such force that he nearly collapsed it on top of them both. "There's someone at the fence," he gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. Someone was pushing against it, just standing there. Derek's breathing became sharp and shallow. They both strained their ears in the sudden silence, and that's when they realized the most terrifying thing of all. The creaking had stopped. "Call the house," Simon urged. "Use your phone and call inside." But Derek was already moving. "No time," he breathed. "We run for the back door, on 3. Derek's hand was on the zipper when they heard Etah's soft footstep on grass, much closer than the fence. 1, 2... Derek yanked the zipper down and burst from the tent, but the scream that tore from his throat sent Simon's world into chaos. Without looking, without thinking, Simon launched himself from the tent and sprinted toward the house, his feet barely touching the ground as terror gave him wings. They crashed through the back door and slammed it behind them, their chests heaving as they tried to catch their breath. Derek's face was ghost white in the kitchen light. "Why did you scream?" Simon demanded, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. Derek's voice shook as he answered. There was someone standing right next to the tent, right there, close enough to touch. They were just watching us. They spent the rest of that night huddled in Derek's bedroom on the second floor, but sleep remained elusive for both of them. Every time Simon approached the window and peered down at the backyard, now illuminated by the security light Derek's father had turned on after hearing about their encounter, the fence stood empty and innocent. Yet, even from the safety of the house, even with adults just down the hall, Simon could swear he still heard it, that methodical, deliberate creaking, as if someone in the darkness was testing the boundaries, waiting for another opportunity to get closer. To this day, Simon has never been able to explain who was in Derek's backyard that night, or what they wanted. But he's never forgotten the feeling of being watched, and he's never spent another night camping outdoors. Some experiences he learned that summer are too unsettling to risk repeating, no matter how much time passes or how much logic suggests it was probably nothing at all. The memory of that figure pressed against the fence, motionless and patient in the darkness, remains as vivid now as it was that night in 2019. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, Simon still finds himself listening for the sound of old wood creaking under deliberate pressure, wondering if somewhere out there, someone is still testing the barriers between safety and the unknown.